All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with the Arkansas Department of Human Services. This webinar is brought to you by AFMC and will be providing an update to the ARChoices policy. Before we get started, I would like to go over just a few logistics. To eliminate background noise, the phone lines are being muted during today's event. Any questions may be submitted through the online Q&A section located to the right of your screen, and we will answer questions at the end of the session. Today's event will be recorded and posted to the AFMC website. Once it's posted, all attendees today will receive an email, including a link to today's recording. I now will turn the presentation over to Mark White, Deputy Director of Aging, Adult, and Behavioral Health Services. Mark?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on, at least for Little Rock, what is a rainy Thursday afternoon. We appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us and allow us to bring you some updates and additional information for providers. We do have some information that's going to cross several boundaries today. They'll be helpful for not only ARChoices providers, but also our personal care providers, in-home care providers, and then we're also talking about EVV, or electronic visit verification, as well. I will tell you on the front end, this will be an abbreviated webinar today due to a couple of situations. We have another webinar that had to be scheduled right after this one, and also some events in the Capitol that are affecting that scheduling. So just to let you know that this will be an abbreviated session today. But we do have some information we want to get to you and address some questions that we've been hearing over the last month. With that said, we will move into the presentation. As I said, of course, the first thing we want to address is we want to talk about some upcoming changes with prior authorization processing for personal care. And then we want to give you a brief update on electronic visit verification and our efforts there. And then finally, we'll have some discussion of criminal record background checks and your responsibilities as providers. And Victoria Evans from the Division of Provider Services and Quality Assurance will be bringing that, and we'll be bringing you some updates and some guidance because we know that there are a number of questions out there from providers about that process and how that has changed or how it should change for providers. So the first and most important topic today is prior authorization processing. And this is something that we had mentioned in our previous webinar and we've talked about previously, just giving you a heads up that this is coming. Last year, DHS put out a procurement for a vendor to take over handling prior authorizations and extensions of benefits for a number of our programs and areas, primarily in the area of behavioral health and developmental disability services. But we also decided to include in that contract prior authorizations for personal care services. And I should specify, this is not all personal care. Rather, this is personal care services for beneficiaries who are aged 21 and older, for our adult beneficiaries who are not on the ARChoices waiver. For individuals who are on ARChoices waiver, those prior authorizations will continue to be processed by DHS RNs. And then for beneficiaries who are under the age of 21, those prior authorizations will continue to be processed by AFMC. But for everything else, for our adult non-waiver beneficiaries, we awarded a contract to EQ Health Solutions to begin processing those prior authorizations. Now, they started operations in the state on January 1 in the behavioral health area, and then they added some areas related to developmental disability services. And on March 1, we are expecting that EQ Health will begin accepting and processing all requests for personal care prior authorizations for beneficiaries who are adults and are not on the waiver. And we are very hopeful and expectant that this will be a tremendous improvement for providers and for us as well. With this new process, you will have one place to go to request prior authorizations, to renew prior authorizations, to submit changes of information, to handle all those tasks. And it'll be centralized in one place, which we think will make it much easier for you as providers and also help us be much more efficient in how those are processed and handled. So to give you just a little bit of background about EQ Health, this is a company. They were established in 1986, and this is what they do every day is IT work and health management related to healthcare and Medicaid. They have developed their own medical management system called EQ Suite, and this is not something that's new. This is in use elsewhere in other states. It's been used in Arkansas now for the last couple of months. It is a secure, HIPAA compliant, very innovative web-based system that allows you as providers to request and manage prior authorizations. And this, as I said, this software program has been operating for more than 20 years. It has processed millions of prior authorizations in 4 other states, and so far we've seen very good experience here as well for the programs that they've been operating. And so that's why we're very excited that EQ Health is now on board to begin handling those prior authorization requests for Arkansas. Now that raises the immediate question of what is coming next for providers. What are the next steps? Yesterday, I distributed an email to all ARChoices and personal care providers for whom I have an email address, letting you know about an initial training webinar that EQ Health will have tomorrow. On Friday, there's one at 9 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. And I know many of you have already signed up for that webinar, so thank you for that. If you have not done so, if you did not see that email, please feel free to reach out to me. You'll see my email address there at the bottom of your screen, mark.white@dhs.arkansas.gov. And this initial webinar on Friday will focus on introducing you to EQ Health's portal, and then also helping you understand how to create an account on that portal, which will be the first step towards working prior authorizations through that system. If you can't attend the Friday webinar, don't worry. There will be additional sessions coming in the coming weeks, as well as other training opportunities to train you on how to use their portal and how you'll work through that process. Now, as I said, there's an email that I distributed yesterday. EQ Health will be distributing an email this afternoon to everyone for whom we have an email address in the MMIS system, so you can be looking for that email. And then also EQ Health will be distributing information about those other training opportunities as well. So that will be coming here very soon to you. And let me just circle back. I know we had a couple of questions that have come up. For EQ Health, as I said, what they will handle is prior authorization request for adult beneficiaries who are not on the waiver, not on the ARChoices waiver. And how we expect this will work is that just as you do today, you as a provider will initiate that process. You will request a prior authorization, but rather than having to go to multiple places as you do now, you'll go to one place, one portal where you will submit that request for a prior authorization. And then EQ Health will manage the process of making the referral to Optum for the independent assessment if that's necessary, getting those assessment results back, and then processing and determining that prior authorization request. Then likewise, our expectation is that for renewals, that you will be able to go into that portal and you will be able to see which prior authorizations are coming due and need renewal, and you'll be able to initiate that process to begin renewal of that prior authorization. And if you'll give me just a moment, I want to check my notes and make sure I covered all the key points regarding the prior authorizations. I believe I did, and let me just go ahead and take a moment. If you have any questions about what we've talked about so far, please feel free to submit those in the chat box and let us see those questions. We would want to try to respond to those as much as we can. I will go ahead and say that there will not be cost to providers for EQ Health and for using this platform. I know that's a question that comes up sometimes. That's something that the state is paying for, and so it won't be any additional cost for you. And another question is related to the Form 618 form. As we've said before, we are working to streamline that form. We believe that there will still be a place for it, but it will be a streamlined form, and it's a form that you'll submit as part of that request through the EQ Health portal. And so that's the process that we expect that you'll see as that rolls out over the next few weeks. All right, with that said, I don't see any additional questions, so we'll go to the next slide. I do want to emphasize to you how important it is that DHS, that we have correct email addresses for you as providers on file with Medicaid. Those email addresses that are on file in MMIS, those that were submitted when you registered as a provider or as you've updated those with MMIS, that will be the starting point for registering providers for EQ Health, but also for electronic visit verification, for EVV when we get to that point here in the next few months. And so I encourage you, if your email address has changed, if the email address that's on file with Medicaid is no longer accurate, please take the steps to update that. And we'll send out some additional information to help you do that here in the coming days. But I just want to encourage you to make sure that you do have a good email address on file so that we're able to reach out to you and that we make you aware of these training opportunities, and so that we can make sure to get you registered for, number one, for EQ Health and for their portal, and then down the line for EVV as we start with that process as well. And one best practice we want to encourage providers is that to have official email addresses for your agencies, for your employees. We still see many cases where we get emails from employees of agencies where it's the employee's personal email address, it's a Gmail address, a Yahoo address, and as long as that employee is working for you, that may be okay. But if that employee leaves, if they quit, we have no way of knowing that that employee is no longer able to receive PHI on your behalf. And so you may end up in a situation where you have a former employee receiving PHI they aren't entitled to, and that presents a potential HIPAA violation. So we do want to encourage you to make sure that you provide and have available those business email addresses for your employees who are receiving PHI. And those are the addresses that we want to see used on our side, that we use to communicate with you for prior authorizations and for EVV. So let me go back. We've had a couple of other questions come in. One question is whether existing authorizations will be transferred to EQ Health. And yes, that is our intention, that for existing prior authorizations, that we will provide all that data to EQ Health so they will have it on file, and we expect that you will be able to access that through the web portal. Now, there should not be any need for any action for you at this point until you get to that renewal point, which is same as it is now. You know, that 60 days out, you need to start looking at that renewal process. The difference will be that rather than emailing the documents to us and going through the MMIS portal, you'll just go to the one place. You'll go to the EQ Health portal, and you'll be able to do that entire renewal process within that portal. And then there's another question about submitting changes to email addresses. There is a process for it. It takes several steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute that by email in the next few days. If you did not get the email that I sent yesterday afternoon and you'd like to be on that list, please just send me your email address to mark.white@dhs.arkansas.gov. I'll make sure you get added to that list. And I'm hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we're going to have an official email distribution list created for providers, and you'll be able to subscribe or unsubscribe at will. And so that'll be coming here very soon. And then one point about independent assessment that I did want to convey to you, this is something we've mentioned before. Optum does now have the ability to email assessment results to providers. And the way it works is that if you have clients who have received an independent assessment, then Optum can send you a spreadsheet that lists the results of those providers as those assessments are completed. If you would like to receive that for your clients, please just send me an email. Send me your Medicaid provider ID numbers that you want notices for, and the email address that it needs to go to. And if you'll just send that to my address, and I'll get that to Optum, and we'll get you set up. And on that one, as I said earlier, we encourage you to use business email addresses. For this in particular, that has to be a business email address for us to be able to use that to send those results to. All right, and that covers the points that we wanted to cover regarding prior authorization and ARChoices. I will mention, I know we had a number of questions coming on our last webinar. We are finishing up responses to those and frequently asked questions, and we'll be distributing those and posting those here very soon. And so you can be looking for those to come out very soon. Oh, and I see one additional question that came in. When will the new 618 be sent out? It should be this month. We're working to finalize those changes, and we will get that out before the end of the month so that you'll have that new form to use with the new process with EQ Health. All right, with that said, I want to give you a brief update on where we are with electronic visit verification, or EVV. We just completed a 2-day set of meetings with our vendor, PCG, working through the business flow and some of the details on how EVV will be implemented. So that process continues to proceed. We're working on making decisions about what that should look like. I will tell you that here in the next couple of weeks, we'll be reaching out to providers to get some feedback and input on some of the questions that have come up. So you can be looking for that here in the very near future, because we want to know what will work for you, what works, what doesn't work, and take that into account as we finish out and implement that EVV solution. One thing I do want to emphasize to you, I know this question, we've still gotten this question several different ways, that we do not expect any cost for providers for EVV in terms of direct cost to PCG or for the software. The only obligation of providers at this point we expect is that your employees, your caregivers, will need to have that smartphone or tablet that they can use to run that app. And they can use their own personal smartphone. So if you have employees who do not have smartphones, that would be the one place where you may have a cost or your employees may have a cost. But as long as they have a smartphone, it can be iPhone or Android, with that app, then you should be able to participate. And at this point, that is the only cost or expense we expect for providers with EVV. We are still aiming to have pilots for EVV beginning this spring into this summer. And I know many of you have already volunteered to be pilots, agencies for EVV, and I appreciate that. If you have not volunteered, and if you're interested in being a pilot, please send me an email. And I'll tell you, especially, we are looking for providers who do not have an EVV solution of their own right now. We have a number of good providers who have agreed to participate, who already have an EVV system, and will be working to integrate their system into the PCG solution. But we also need providers who don't have anything right now, and we'll be starting from scratch, and we'll be using that smartphone app. So if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to me and let me know, and I'll put you in touch with PCG, and we'll put you on that list. PCG has compiled responses to the technical questions that many of you had in our last webinar, and we're also putting the finishing touches on responses to some of the policy questions there. And so those questions and answers will be posted to AFMC's website, we hope here in just the next couple of days. So you can be looking for that as well. And I believe it will be on the page where the video of the webinar itself is located. So you can go to the page for that 117 webinar. We do continue to meet with PCG and plan that out. And then we will have additional webinars coming over the coming months as we gear up for EVV and get you up to speed and get you ready for that transition to come. All right, with that said, that covers everything I had on EVV. I think we have a couple of other questions. Let me see if I can respond to those before I hand off the webinar to Victoria for the discussion of the criminal background checks. One question is whether prior authorizations can be obtained through the portal until the EQ Health training is held. My understanding is that the portal is not open to personal care providers yet. It will open March 1. There will be registration before then, but I do not expect that you'll be able to access those prior authorizations through that portal until after March 1. But once we get past March 1 and you're registered, we expect you will have access to all those prior authorizations. And then as far as renewal process, yes, at this point, what we expect is for providers to begin that renewal process 60 days out from the 1-year point from the last Optum assessment, and that's the timing that we're using for the renewals of personal care prior authorizations. And that's an issue that we'll have some additional guidance on in the guidance that we'll have coming out here in the next few days. There's a question about if EVV will be required for private pay clients, and the answer is no. EVV is a Medicaid requirement. It is only required for clients who are being paid, whose services are being paid for by Medicaid. This does not affect anything for private pay. Clients who are being paid for through private insurance, that depends on the requirements of that insurance carrier. And I will mention for clients who are going into the passes, the passes will be implementing EVV, but it is their decision of how they implement it. So if you have clients who are through a pass, you need to reach out to that pass and visit with that pass about how they intend to implement EVV. And then there's a question on EVV about if there's a HIPAA violation with employees using their personal cell phones. And the answer is no for a couple of reasons. One is that with the app on that phone, the data on that app is encrypted, and it's linked back to the server so that you as an agency, you control whether or not that employee has access to the data within the app. In addition, there are other security provisions in place that make sure that that solution is HIPAA compliant. And then for timing, yes, we're looking for pilots to begin and testing of the app to begin in the spring, going into the summer. Our hope and expectation is that we will have full implementation of EVV in the fall. We do have a federal deadline of January 1, 2020, and so we want to be early. We want to get this up and running and implemented before that deadline, so that we have some time that we know everything is running smoothly and that we're in full compliance with those federal requirements. All right. I may come back to that question. Okay, there's a question about home-delivered meals for ARChoices clients. At this point, we're not expecting EVV to be required for home-delivered meals. That may change at some point, and I just want to be clear that, number one, it's certain that there are other areas where EVV will be required, like home health, private duty nursing, because that federal requirement kicks in 1 year later. For things like home-delivered meals, we have looked at that. At this point, we're not planning to include that, but that is something that we'll be revisiting over the next few months and thinking through if it makes sense for that to have an EVV requirement. And as we look at that, we will be reaching out to providers to get your thoughts and get your input. There's a question about how the new prior authorization process affects those in the pass. If you have clients who are going into a pass, then as of March 1, prior authorizations, that will need to run through the pass. And so you'll need to work with the pass to get that authorization from the pass or whatever their procedure may be. Now understand that for all of our active prior authorizations for pass clients, we're providing all that data to the passes. So they will have that as of March 1, and they are required to recognize those prior authorizations for a period of time. So there will be time to make that transition. But yes, as of March 1, those prior authorizations for pass clients will be the responsibility of the pass. There's a question about if a provider has their own EVV system, how will the billing process change? And that is something we are still working through with PCG. There's still some questions about what that process is going to look like. We want to make it's a process so it is as transparent to you as a provider as possible. So I don't have a lot of details on that yet, but I expect we will have more details on that here very soon. If you have prior authorizations now that need renewal and you need to go through the same process that you have been, which is to go through the MMI's portal, get that tracking number, and email that tracking number along with 618 to referrals@arkansas.gov. If you have any that are not going through, or if you have that you're not sure where they're at, please reach out to your local DHS nurse, and they can work with you to identify where those prior authorizations are in the process and then get those renewed. And there's a question about on EVV for clients who are not Medicaid. And as I said earlier, if a client is not on Medicaid, then we do not require EVV for them. That is purely up to you as a provider, as an agency, if you want to use EVV for your private pay clients. Our requirement only extends to those clients who are Medicaid clients. And there's a question about, will each provider have an admin within the EVV system? Yes. You as an agency, you will have a central admin account that will be the controlling account, so to speak, and you'll be able to decide which of your other employees have access to that system. But you will have an admin account where you can make those decisions and regulate that access, as well as enter in information about your clients and about your caregivers. And there's a question about, will independent choices caregivers be required to participate in the EVV? And the answer is yes. Yes, the EVV requirement does apply to self-direction. And there's a question hearing that a lot of beneficiaries are about to be switched from Tier 2 to Tier 1 and Tier 3. And that's not to say we have not seen that. In the assessments that Optum has been doing to date, as before, we've seen a handful of Tier 3s. We've seen some Tier 1s, but so far what we've seen has been consistent with the assessments that were performed last year under the old RPATH assessment. So right now we're seeing very consistent results, and we're not seeing any threat or large number of beneficiaries in threat of changing tiers. That's just not something we've seen. And there's a question of whether or not EVV will be used for targeted case management. That is something that we have not decided yet. Kind of along the lines of the home-delivered meals, we'll be looking at that and considering that issue, but at this point, there are no plans to include it for EVV. And then there's another question of if the agency's admin account in EVV will be responsible for adding clients into the system. And we're still working through with PCG how that process will work. I expect it will be a mix of providers will be able to enter that in on a one-off basis to enter in clients, but there will also be an import capability so you can import an entire list of clients and get that in there. Now, with that said, the EVV system will have full access to Medicaid eligibility. So all the beneficiaries' information will be in their system. The only issue will be how to use a provider to link up and show the EVV system that, yes, this Medicaid beneficiary belongs to me. This is someone that I'm serving. And that's where there will be a manual process, there will be an upload process, and we'll look at any other options that may be helpful for you as providers to make that connection. All right, with that said, I know we're now past 12:30, and I do want to leave time for Victoria to talk through the criminal background checks. So I will sign off at this point, and if there are any questions that we missed, we'll certainly go back and look at those and see if we can include those in the questions and answers that we're getting ready to send out here shortly. So if you give us just a moment to make the transition, we will shift to the criminal background check issue.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Victoria Evans with the Division of Provider Services and Quality Assurance. And I know that some of you have reached out to probably both Mark White and Craig Cloud about the requirements that are outlined in the new provider manual around criminal record checks and maltreatment checks. What I'm here to tell you today may not satisfy your curiosity, but we recently, because of some federal and state audits by the state police, we had to change our criminal record check process internally and how it impacts providers, those long-term care providers. And so we sort of started with that group, and it had to implement some changes in the process, had to require a new form or two, and so we are still sort of working through that. That went live on January 1st, some of you may have heard about that or may be participating in that, but we're still working through that, and also trying to make sure that the process that we were required to implement to be compliant with some audits is as streamlined as it can be, as tolerable for both the provider community and for our internal staff, doesn't place an undue burden on the providers or our staff. And so we are likely going to be tweaking that process some. We have additional meetings set up for later this month with the representatives of the state police to talk through this new process that we just implemented for those long-term care providers, to make sure that it's the best option we have. And so we are hesitant to introduce new provider types into that process before we get all the kinks worked out. And so I feel like we're doing everyone a favor by telling you that at this point we're not ready to bring you guys into that mix in terms of what that new criminal record check process looks like. So we are actually looking to delay implementation of that for ARChoices and personal care providers until July 1st of this year. So it'll give us time to do more training with you guys, to make sure everybody understands the process, to make sure we've got our sort of all the kinks worked out of our process, and that the state police is good with those changes that we're making. And so I know that folks are curious and they want to be compliant, because it does say in their new provider manual that you need to be doing these things. And by and large, most, if not all of you, are already doing criminal record checks on your employees. And so we're not looking to have you change anything just yet. So just keep doing what you've been doing. I can tell you, I don't know what your experience level is in terms of ARChoices and personal care providers with performing the adult and child maltreatment registry checks. But I can, for those of you that may not be familiar with that, I can give you, some sort of high-level info about that. But those checks are actually still paper-based, and essentially you pull down the form from the DHS website. The adult maltreatment is run through the Adult Protective Services unit within DHS, and the child maltreatment registry check is run through the Division of Children and Family Services, so DCFS. And essentially that form is a form that the applicant, so someone that you're looking to hire or your current employee, that's a form that they fill out, and it's essentially giving DHS consent to run their name against their name and their, identifying information, their personal identifying information, birth date, Social Security, that sort of thing, to run that information against those maltreatment registries, both the adult and the child. And so if you're doing that already, great, keep doing it. If you're not, you can look into it on your own. We can provide some more support to you to help familiarize you with that process. But those two maltreatment registry checks are run through divisions that are not the Division of Provider Services and Quality Assurance. So that adult maltreatment check is run through Adult Protective Services, which is with Mark White's group in DAABH, and then the child maltreatment check is run through DCFS, that Division of Children and Family Services. And then the other maybe new thing that folks are wondering about that you may not have heard about before is that there's a reference in the provider manuals now that kind of at the end of that paragraph where it talks about, you're going to do criminal record checks on your owners and your employees, and you're going to do these maltreatment registry checks. So the last little bit of that paragraph mentions a employment clearance registry, and that may be something that some of you are not familiar with. And what that is It's similar to the maltreatment registry, but it's actually maintained by a contractor through the Office of Long-Term Care, and people that are placed on that employment clearance registry have had substantiated reports of abuse, neglect, or misappropriation of resident or client property or funds. And so they have been investigation has been launched, and the findings have been substantiated, and so they are placed on that employment clearance registry, and that is something that's utilized by our long-term care facilities, and so it's typically direct care workers that are placed on that, so our LPNs. Sometimes it's an administrator of a nursing home potentially, but by and large it's direct care staff that find themselves placed on that registry, and they go through the same process of due process that you would find if someone is being recommended for placement on the adult or child maltreatment registry. They're notified, they can appeal, they have hearings, they go through all that sort of process before they're actually placed on that employment clearance registry. So that probably is a new requirement for you all that you've not had to do in the past, and essentially it's a site that we make available to you, and you type in the name and the identifying information, and it runs that person against that registry to see if they pop up as a hit. And what it means if they're on there is that a critical incident happened at our former place of employment, and after an investigation they were found to have done something that to a client that in the form of abuse, neglect, or misappropriation. So that is something that we'll talk about too in the future, and so I think what you can expect from us is over the course of the next 4 to 8 weeks, we'll come back to you at one of these regularly scheduled webinars to talk to you about what that process is going to look like for your criminal record checks, your maltreatment checks, and your employment clearance registry check that you need to start doing. But we're not going to be holding folks accountable to that until July 1st of this year. So we're going to give you plenty of time to ask questions about the process, about the forms, about who to contact if you need more information about that process. And so we'll make sure to give you very detailed information in the future. But today, we just wanted to let you know that you would just carry on like you always have. You'll just do what you've always done in terms of those criminal record checks. And we're going to be meeting internally with the state police here at the end of the month to go over the process that we had to implement for long-term care providers earlier this year to make sure that that's the best option we have, because we do feel like there are some things we can tweak there to make it more efficient and to streamline that for folks so that it's not such a burden. But with that, I will answer any questions that you have. So the new the provider manual, that's your Medicaid provider manual. So that's available on the Medicaid website under the Provider Resources Billing Manuals. I will say, Craig wanted me to mention this, but as you all know, the ARChoices providers do not have a licensure or certification manual that they adhere to. So every other provider type that DIPSQA is charged with monitoring and licensing and certifying, everybody else has one, and ARChoices, for whatever reason, never has. And so we are working on one. We are putting the kind of finishing touches on that licensure certification manual for ARChoices. A lot of it is pulled directly from the Medicaid manual in terms of services and what you can and can't provide, documentation you need to keep, all that kind of stuff. And in that licensure manual, it will be spelled out, the process for reporting incidents and accidents, those critical incidents that might happen. It'll also include the criminal record checks, sort of the process, the requirements, the expectations. It'll have all of that spelled out in that licensure manual. And we are expecting to begin routing that for internal review in case other divisions like Mark White and some of his staff might want to take a look at it, just to make sure we haven't stepped over the line or out of line in terms of what's in the Medicaid manual and what's in the waiver. But we've been very diligent at double checking all that to make sure that that we're falling in line with what's already out there. But that manual will come out for public comment sometime this spring. So we'll make sure that in one of our upcoming webinars, when it gets ready, when it's getting close to being put out for public comment, we'll make sure that we let you guys know that so you can be looking for it and have ample opportunity. We'll also we will hold a public hearing for it as well, so that you don't just have to do written comments, that you'll be able to verbalize your comments and have it on the record. So stay tuned for that. So the letters requiring fingerprints done by March 1, 2019 is being delayed. You might have to tell me what letter you're talking about. I'm not sure what letter you're referring to. So in terms of maltreatment checks and renewal of criminal background checks, so the criminal record check is supposed to be renewed every 5 years. Okay, so we haven't really discussed this in great detail, but my guess is that you will do those as they come up for renewal, not have to do, all current employees right away or, shortly after July 1st. I don't think that's our intention. Where are these forms? So I think you're probably talking about the adult and child maltreatment forms. I'll have to get back to you on that. I am almost positive that they are available through the DHS website. My guess is that the adult maltreatment ones, you can get them through APS, and the child would be through the DCFS website. But I will get you specific links, and we'll let AFMC post those. I'll do the same thing for that employment clearance registry. Okay, so the next question, will fees for the adult and child maltreatment registries be waived in the future like the ECR, which is that employment clearance registry? I don't have an answer for you today on that. That's not something that anyone has brought to our attention, so I will make sure that we flag that one to get back to you on. So what do you do when someone's on the list? May they be allowed time to appeal while working or suspended or terminated? I will have to get with OCC to see what the typical process is for that. No, Mark, yeah. I think we're going to have to get back to you on that. To be honest, I don't know what the expectation is for providers in terms of when someone is a hit on one of those registries, if they're allowed to continue working until their appeal is exhausted. I'd have to check. What about the fingerprinting issue that first came through Medicaid and now requested by OLTC? Please address that. I don't know if you're referring to, something related to provider enrollment in terms of when you say, what about the fingerprinting issue that first came through Medicaid? So there is something in provider enrollment where there's some fingerprint, the national background check is required, which is when you would do the fingerprints. It's only for that national, the FBI check. If you do a state check, there's no fingerprints required. There's an online portal through the state police where you go and type in their information, and it gives you a pretty quick response on whether the person has a clean history or not. The Office of Long-Term Care, so what's being required now is just a little different than the way it was handled in the past. And so those are for those long-term care facilities, and like I said before, we had to change some things because of a state and federal audit that we had recently. And the thing that changed in that process is that most of them were doing state checks online, some of them weren't, and so we told them we need everybody to do their state criminal record checks online through the Arkansas State Police portal, because that allows you to get results back very quickly, and it prevents us from having to do the data entry on your behalf and delay the timeline. What also changed is that we had to require that providers, instead of when they're doing their national checks, their FBI background checks, instead of doing those fingerprint cards and then sending them directly to the state police, they now have to send them to the Office of Long-Term Care, and then we do some things with it, and then we send it to the state police to be processed. So it added an extra step in there, which means they weren't going straight to the state police for processing. It had to come to us first. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about. That's a long answer, but I'm not exactly sure if that's if that answer was responsive to your question. So you'll have to go back to the provider manual. The question is this just for the caregivers, or do I need to do these checks on all office workers? I believe in the manual it lays out who should go through this type of check, and the background checks and the registry checks. If I'm remembering, it's owners, principal, owners, and employees. I mean, I think employees is kind of a vague term. I don't think it says direct care staff or anything like that. So providers will not be held accountable for having all the maltreatment checks completed on employees until July 1st, even though the manual is effective. That's correct. I mean, you can go ahead and start doing those maltreatment checks. That's just a paper form that you draw down from the website and start filling them out on your employees. I mean, if I were you, I would start on those now, even though we're saying we won't, we're not going to be mad at you if you don't get them done, or you're not starting until July 1st. But on those maltreatment checks, those things get bottlenecked in spring and summer, because all of the schools have to submit all of their employees for maltreatment checks before the school year can start. And so APS and CPS get super overwhelmed in the summertime. And so if you've already been doing those adult maltreatment checks, you could just keep doing them. If there are findings for the child or adult maltreatment checks, are we as providers required to terminate employees prior to the July 1 date? Again, I don't know what the process is in terms of what's expected of providers when someone comes back as a hit on one of those maltreatment registries. There is in some cases, the employee is able to appeal, and that usually happens with the child maltreatment registry, because there weren't, I'm trying to think how I can say this, policies weren't in place that required Child Protective Services to notify folks that they were being placed on the registry prior to 2007-ish. So folks that might have been placed on that child maltreatment registry in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, they weren't necessarily notified that they were going on that registry. And so I can just tell you that we started criminal record checks and these maltreatment checks on the caregivers in our self-direction program with Independent Choices. We started that a year ago, and we had quite a few folks that kind of popped up on that child maltreatment registry that didn't know they were on it, and they have been allowed to have an expedited hearing to petition to have their name removed, and most of them have been successful. So again, we'll have to get with OCC on what the expectation is in terms of what providers should do when someone comes up. Yeah, and so we're reaching our time limit. I think we're going to have to wrap up, and so AFMC actually sends us a list of all these questions shortly after the webinar so that we can begin to respond to those. And so we will get those questions from AFMC. We will draft and craft our responses, and we will get those back to AFMC or just plan to cover them in our next webinar, which is right now scheduled for February 21st. So we may do both. We may check back in on some of those that were really pressing and include those in our slides for the next webinar, and we will probably also post responses to AFMC's website, and it's the same site where you would go to try to find an archived webinar presentation. So it'll be posted along with that.
Yes. Thank you very much. We have received quite a few questions, and we will be getting those questions over so that they can be answered. This does conclude our webinar for today. I do want to thank Mark and Victoria for their presentations and answering all of these questions. As a reminder, today's event was recorded, and as Victoria stated, it will be posted to the AFMC website. There you can find a link to the recording, the presentation, and then as well as FAQs once those have been reviewed. All attendees will receive that email link shortly after the presentation today. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the afternoon.